India and Pakistan, where the mounted skill at arms is hugely popular. You have Australia, South Africa, it's immensely popular. In fact, we've been over to South Africa and competed once or twice there. They are horribly good, but they have decent weather all the year round, and like us, we only have a few months in which to cram all our practice in. The first and most important thing is that you can ride well. When you're teaching somebody to ride, the important thing is that they develop an independent seat, so they're not relying on the stirrups and the reins to keep themselves on. And the rider does need to be able to walk, trot, canter, jump, gallop, without any worry or thought, because the handling of the weapons takes a lot of concentration and coordination. The weapons are sharp. They are pointed when you're training. Obviously you use poles which aren't going to hurt anyone or anything, but once you start to compete seriously, those are weapons that you're handling, and you do need to handle them as carefully as you would a loaded gun. So a good rider is important to begin with. And then as far as the horse is concerned, you need a horse which is active but also sensible. And you need to have time and patience to introduce the horse little by little to each of the tasks that you're going to expect of it. Quite often find that ex-polo ponies are very quick to adapt to this sport because they're used to poles, flying around their heads, and odd and peculiar things happening. But most horses, provided you take your time and train them carefully, will take to it. You also need room, a reasonably flat, large area in which to train as well. And the equipment, sword dummies, gallows, and swords and lances. If I had a horse that was reasonably well schooled in the first place, I would expect to start 1 year getting it ready, and the next year I would want to be taking it out to a few little shows. I wouldn't be expecting to do terribly well. Also, it would all depends on how experienced the horse is. Is the horse actually used to going out and going to shows in the first place? So, with a reasonably educated horse, probably you're thinking about a couple of years. This particular horse is a thoroughbred. Really and truly, he's a little bit tall for the job, but his temperament is excellent. My problem with him is that he's very tall and I've got rather short arms, but he makes up for it in other ways. I would suggest that most of the horses we ride now have very little in common with the horses that were around at that time. You've got to bear in mind that 500 or 600 years ago, the horse was like a motor car, and many more people had the skills of riding than do nowadays. Having said that, the only place to get from A to B was on your horse or in a boat. So a lot of these horses travelled hundreds and hundreds of miles. Not only did they travel hundreds of miles, but at the end of the journey they were still serviceable and had to go and fight a battle. So I do take my hat off to them. It's hard enough with lorries and modern technology to get your horse from A to B and keep it serviceable in a competition, especially for 3 days, let alone if you're on campaign. The thing that I find most difficult is pegging with a sword, because the ground's a long way down on this horse, and I've got short arms and he's got long legs. Ideally with a skill at arms horse you want something probably about 15.1, 15.2 that's fairly close to the ground. The most difficult thing probably with training the horses for the skill at arms is when you come to use a gun. There are many horses that will use the lance and the sword and are quite happy with it, but training the horse to accept a gun going off on its back is the most difficult thing to do. It also requires confidence from the rider. If the rider is anxious and worried about it, it immediately conveys itself through to the horse. I think This event is absolutely tremendous. And to date in this country we've had to rely on the goodwill of the military to put on mounted skeleton arms shows. Here at Hurstman Zoo we have the first 3-day mounted skeleton arms competition in the country, and so it's a tremendous boost for the sport in general.
Although today we might regard skillet arms tournaments as light sporting entertainment, their original purpose had a deadly serious intent to train men for combat. Knights were a warrior class made up of minor nobility who usually fought as cavalry for a lord in return for food and lodgings. They aspired to the chivalric code of idealized behavior that was important to the times and still resonates down the ages today. Jousting was the way the knights honed their battle skills while providing public entertainment. But in time, jousting tournaments came to provide a means to wealth and reputation. There were two types of tournament: a joust of peace and a joust of war. In a joust of peace, the lances were blunted by a coronal or circular crown. The main objective was to unseat the opponent, but points could also be scored depending on which part of the body was hit. In a society that idealized chivalrous behavior, jousting presented a young knight with an opportunity to impress the ladies and perhaps the possibility of social advancement through marriage. But a joust of war meant that blood would be spilt and men were frequently killed. Jousts of war were closed events, usually only attended by fellow knights. It was not unknown for such a contest to settle the outcome of a battle. The jousting competition at Hurstmonceau draws entries from Europe as well as from around the United Kingdom. Each knight tilts against the others, the number of points they score, depending on where he or even she strikes their opponent. It is a spectacular display of horsemanship and fighting skill. The eventual winner is a knight from Wales who accepts his plaudits from a large and enthusiastic crowd that have come to Hurstmonceau Castle for a memorable day out at the medieval festival.